I used to think fences were simple. Measure the posts, set the concrete, keep the dog in, and the nosy inferences out. Then the board discovered my rebuild, and the countdown started. A 72-hour deadline hangs over a household like a storm clock, each minute tapping the glass a little louder. I'm the one staring at the clock. The order is clear. Bring the fence down to the old height or face fines that compound, liens that linger, and a reputation on our cul-de-sac that never quite washes clean. The question breathing down my neck is whether the timer will force me to tear it all down, fast, sloppy, and expensive, or whether I will find a way to pause time without touching a single slat. I didn't plan for a standoff. We had wind damage in March, 2 panels folded like playing cards, and I replaced them with something sturdier and 2 inches taller to align with the yard slope. The lumber smelled like fresh citrus and sap when the delivery truck left. I remember thinking the job would be the easiest home fix I'd tackled in years. It was until a compliance chair named Ms. D found a bylaw I'd never seen cited in my decade here, and the board treated those 2 inches like I'd built a watchtower. The notice arrived in a crisp envelope, like a wedding invitation with a bad mood. I know how this community works. Nothing moves until someone pretends the rulebook is a sacred text. The rulebook is big, and selective memory is bigger. I start pulling facts before panic finds a foothold. I want the timeline to be solid, the costs logged, the claims documented. If I fail, I lose money and time. If I succeed, I don't just keep the fence. I pull a thread that might loosen something tighter than wood and screws. Power, image, the way a neighborhood decides who belongs and who obeys. I don't announce any of that. I make coffee. I mark the 72 hours on a sticky note and set it next to the sink. I plan to peel it off when I have the leverage to make it meaningless. Somewhere in the file box is the one page that matters more than all the warnings, but I don't know it yet. All I have is a whiff of cedar dust clinging to my sleeves and the faint hum of a leaf blower rolling down the street, like a clock that won't stop reminding me that the board thinks it already won. I won't let them rush me. I can feel an answer forming, slow but sure, like post holes settling in gravel. The board believes speed is their advantage. In my experience, pressure reveals gaps. I intend to find them and pry. Our street is short and circular, a pocket where every routine becomes a ritual. On trash days, bins line the curb in the same order. On Friday evenings, someone pushes a stroller past the same 3 driveways and points at the same mailboxes with painted numbers. The association pretends this symmetry is safety. It's also camouflage. You can hide a lot behind routine if nobody reads the past meeting notes. The notice says I violated Section 7.2 of the CC&Rs, fence height and sight lines, citing a 4-foot cap near front corners and a 6-foot maximum along side yards except for legacy exceptions. The phrase legacy exceptions sits there like a secret passage that only opens for people with the right handshake. I don't have the handshake, but I have a printer, a highlighter, and a habit of saving envelopes. I pull a courtesy notice, dated May 9th, from my file box and tack it to a corkboard above the desk. I add a board agenda excerpt from March 28th, the day they discussed storm repairs and temporary variances for safety. The agenda line ends abruptly. No notes on how any motion passed. No follow-up entries on who got a variance or how many inches counted as temporary. That absence is the first loose nail. Ms. D, the compliance chair, is everything a board craves when it wants a symbol. She's tidy and relentless, the kind of person who believes the rules are there to keep a neighborhood from sliding into chaos, starting with the wrong shade of stain and ending with an RV on cinder blocks. She's not evil. She's hungry for order, and order feeds on targets. My fence is made to order. She treats the rebuild like it's a statement of defiance rather than a Sunday project that got taller where the yard dips. She loves the phrase precedent and uses it the way a stamp uses ink. The fine schedule attached to the notice reads like a meter in a taxi stuck in traffic, an initial hit, then daily increments. If I comply in 72 hours, they'll waive the compounding. If I don't, it escalates. My budget can survive a waiver. It cannot survive a meter. I list out what the rebuild cost: lumber, hardware, concrete, a rented auger. It's a total I'd rather not see twice. Money is the stick the board expects to drive decisions, which is exactly why I decide not to react with my wallet. Instead, I pull the CC&R booklet, a yellowed copy labeled Revised 2012, and flip to section 7.2. The language is narrow and old. It also mentions corner lots and sight triangles for drivers turning in from the main road. I am mid-loop, not a corner. The page doesn't say cul-de-sac, but it defines sight lines within 20 feet of intersections. Our circle has no intersections. That definition might be useless for my exact geometry, or crucial. The day I set the posts, I snapped a chalk line and measured from the sidewalk toward the yard. Everything sits inside the property line by a safe margin. The panel that killed their mood is the one near the mailbox cluster, where the grass dips and the slope makes the top rail look high from the sidewalk, lower from the yard. The rulebook measures from finished grade, not optical illusion. I write that sentence down. Technicalities are shields made of thin, stubborn metal. I'll need several. Under the agenda excerpt, I pin a printout labeled Maintenance Report, Storm Damage, the one a contractor left in my mailbox after the March wind gusts. He circled words about safety and temporary stabilization, expert language that boards usually respect when it comes with a logo. That report mentions fence failure was structural near corner posts and recommends a replacement plan aligned with current code. The report doesn't list inches. The report lists causes and remedies. It's not a smoking gun, but it's not useless either. If my rebuild aligns with current code, the board must explain how current got defined when I was juggling a bent T-post with one hand and wet concrete with the other. I'm not a lawyer. I'm a homeowner with a corkboard, a big coffee mug, and a personality that calcifies when a deadline tries to push me. I also have a theme for this fight, and it's simple: boundaries, literal and social. The board wants the neighborhood to be a picture frame where nothing leans or breathes. I want a frame that can handle real life without cracking. The fence is wood. The real battle is about who gets to define the line. The morning after the notice, the air is cool enough that breath hovers when you exhale. A mower starts 2 yards over, a low thrum moving across the circle like a slow wave. I walk the fence with a tape and a notepad. Each panel shows 6 feet from finished grade, except at the dip, where the upright is still 6, but the ground falls 2 inches. From the sidewalk, the top looks tall. From my yard, it's level. I note the measurements, panel by panel, with tiny arrows marking grade. If they want numbers, I'll give them more numbers than they asked for. I also log the mailbox. It's at least 12 feet from the nearest post. The CC&R restriction on mailboxes, section 4.3, governs styles and heights, not fence proximity. Still, I scribble CC&R section 4.3 mailbox rule, no conflict. Evidence works best when it swats away red herrings before they swim toward a vote. Before I'm done, another sheet gets attacked. City permit portal, search result. Our city doesn't require fence permits under a certain height, but it keeps a portal for inspection tags when projects bump against utilities. My search shows nothing for my parcel in the last 6 months. It also shows no recent variance requests by address. That absence is a silence I can use later if someone claims the board required a permit nobody told us about. Silence can be loud if you frame it right. Chapter 08:00. By the time I sit back at the desk, my corkboard looks like a patient with sensor dots. CC&R section 7.2 excerpt, board agenda excerpt, March 28th. Maintenance report, courtesy notice dated May 9th, and a blank space I label variance/April. I don't know why I label it that month. I only know the board keeps inconsistent calendars, and April is when the storm cleanup turned to policy talk. The word variance floats in my head like a life ring. If one exists for our circle, or for my lot, this fight changes shape. The first small disputes begin as whispers that travel faster than trucks. A neighbor who rakes every leaf into perfect rows starts trimming along my side of the sidewalk and pauses to study the fence line with theatrical patience. Another begins parking farther from my curb, as if the rails might cast a shadow that dings door paint. Petty gestures are currency here. I notice them. I also noticed the board's yellow slips multiplying on other houses this week, a blizzard of friendly reminders that feel anything but friendly. The chair's message is everywhere. Control is active, and trouble is contagious. I review the fine schedule again. It's designed to make me flinch. I won't. Instead, I write a short plan in the notebook. Confirm CC&R text, gather sightline measurements, search past board minutes for legacy exceptions, Collect any public references to storm-related variances. The plan isn't dramatic. It is patient and layered. Before this is over, patience will become pressure from my side. I start with minutes. The association posts PDFs on a creaky portal that looks 2 versions behind modern. Each file is named like a puzzle. Minutes_regular_03-14, then minutes_special_04-11. I open March, and there it is, a note about temporary variances to address wind damage. Compliance chair to draft process. Draft, not adopt. Process, not rule. April's file opens with a line item titled Fence Height, Cedar Cul-de-Sac, and my cursor hangs in the air like a held breath. The page lists discussion and a motion to affirm height limits. It does not list a vote tally. It ends with action item. Confirm existing legacy variances by lot. That line turns my sticky note about April into a siren. If they confirmed legacy variances by lot, then somewhere there should be a list. If there's a list, it might include my address or my next-door neighbors, which would create a sightline precedent on our shared boundary. I jot evidence prop, board agenda excerpt, March 28th, and underline it, then add legacy list with 3 question marks. In my experience, questions with 3 marks become leverage points if you refuse to let them go. I also add a separate prop to my plan. Final notice dated May 12th. That one sits in the file, but hasn't been pinned to the board yet. It's the board's chess piece. I'll use it later, after I set mine. By late afternoon, the sun angles low and throws long slats across the grass. I picture the compliance chair watching the clock, waiting for me to blink at hour 41, then 36. I won't blink. Instead, I draft a short message that summarizes my measurements, references CC&Rs section 7.2, and requests the association's documentation of any legacy exceptions confirmed in April. I keep it factual, because narration may be petty but paperwork is always plain. I also mention a safety report from March and ask for the written process the chair was tasked to draft. If she drafted it, I want it. If she didn't, then the gap is real, and the board has a problem that looks a lot like selective enforcement. Before I hit send, I add a line to my notebook labeled Theme Anchor, Boundaries, and under it, abuse of power shows up as urgency. Urgency is their tactic. My tactic is proof. The proof will be boring, dates, inches, acronyms, but that's fine. Boring is devastating when it's precise. The timer keeps sliding toward 0, and the board thinks the deadline decides everything. The real decision will be made by a single document I haven't unearthed yet. If I can find it before hour 71, the teardown dies on paper, not with a pry bar. I close the notebook and step into the yard. The smell of cut grass hangs above the sidewalk, and a porch light clicks on with a faint hum. I run my hand along the top rail, feeling each screw head, imagining a future where I disassemble this with my jaw clenched, each panel a bill I didn't know. I imagine another future where I present a page at the next meeting and watch the meter stop mid-tick. One future demands speed, the other demands thoroughness. I sleep better choosing the second. By evening, I've combed the portal for every mention of variance, temporary, legacy, and sightline. The search returns fragments. A committee report from 2 years ago about a corner lot on Birch Loop. A quick vote last summer granting a driveway setback exception for an elderly resident. And a cryptic line in April, variance packet reviewed, stamp applied for record, with no link, no attachment, just that phrase. If a stamp exists, it lives in a binder the chair keeps in her home office or in a storage box the property manager lugs to meetings. The stamp is a clue. Stamps leave impressions. Impressions get scanned. I mark tomorrow for a records request under our governing documents inspection rights. Associations love to invoke rules. Inspection rights are rules too. As I shut down the laptop, I reflect on the story I'm telling myself. This neighborhood loves a story with clear villains, but clear villains are rare. What exists are habits and shortcuts. A forgotten bylaw isn't evil, it's convenient. A deadline isn't justice, it's leverage. The game is not whether I love or hate the rules. The game is whether I know the rules well enough to make them carry my weight instead of crushing me. I set the alarm early. The plan for the next day is simple. Measurements in hand, a records request drafted, and a quiet visit to the cul-de-sac's oldest resident, Mr. K. No quotes, no debates, just to check on whether any fence on the circle stood at my height before we all started measuring with calipers. History matters to rules. If I can find a photograph or an old contractor invoice, the phrase legacy exception stops being theory and starts being lumber. I also write 3 words on a new sticky note: HOA versus homeowner. It's a reminder to thread the reality of this fight into the larger chorus so many people know. This is not just my problem. It's a page in a bigger book. People call it an HOA nightmare. I call it a boundary lesson. Either way, the timing is strict, and the story doesn't pause because I'm tired. When the house quiets, I step outside one last time. The air has that thin, metallic chill that arrives just after sunset. Somewhere, a dog's tag jingles, and a car door closes with a hollow thud. The cul-de-sac looks peaceful, but I've learned peace is what rules look like from far away. Up close, they're rough cut. Up close, they splinter if you push. Tomorrow I'll push, not with noise or drama, but with a page. I intend to make the board read the whole thing slowly. And when I do, I'll place one more word where they can't miss it: variance. The chair's stamp, somewhere, has a date. If that date is April 12th, the story shifts in my direction without a single screw turned. As I lock the back door, I think about what satisfying revenge looks like when the opponent is a committee. It's not a scene. It's a sequence. First, patience, then proof, then a meeting where the room hears the rulebook speak in my favor. A satisfying revenge story in a neighborhood like ours doesn't end with a shout. It ends with a vote that sounds routine and feels like a small earthquake under neat hedges. The countdown continues. The fence stands. I'm ready for the next page. Morning breaks with a thin veil of fog over the cul-de-sac, softening the corners and making the mailboxes look like chess pieces on a muted board. I start with the records request. The association's bylaws grant inspection rights for governing documents and official records. That includes variance logs, agendas, and any stamped approvals. I submit a written request to the property manager and cite the section that gives a deadline for access. It is not an argument. It is a clock of my own, running alongside theirs. While that timer begins, I take the notebook and the tape back outside and photograph each panel with a small ruler against the uprights. The angles don't lie. Finished grade, 6 feet. At the dip, I include the measurement to the soil. I add a wide shot from the sidewalk to show sight lines across the circle. Nothing is blocked, nothing is blind. If a standard defines a sight triangle, our circle isn't one. I keep the search going with neighbors who have lived here longer than our paint jobs. Mr. K has been on Cedar since the developer turned the dirt and promised quiet evenings forever. He keeps a garage like a museum, labeled bins, a pegboard with each tool's outline, and a stack of old newsletters in a plastic tub. I am careful. I never ask for confrontation, only closure. He remembers when the board allowed taller fencing during the first landscaping season because the grading was inconsistent. He thinks it was around rain week, a phrase that puts us in April. He rummages and pulls a faded photograph from a community picnic. In the background, a side yard fence leans over the same dip that tests my top rail today. The photo isn't a measurement, but it is history in color. If a taller run existed on this circle as landscaping settled, the idea of legacy exceptions is no longer abstract. I jot the date from the back, April, year 1 of our phase. In the afternoon, the portal shows my inspection request marked received. The manager sends a brief note acknowledging it and promising a time to inspect the records at the office. The office is a rented suite by the dry cleaner. It houses binders and a printer that eats staples. That printer has power the board underestimates. Paper remembers. Stamps don't vanish after a meeting. I add one more sheet to the corkboard. Final notice dated May 12th. It's the board's threat dressed up as procedure, and it mirrors the chair's tone: urgent, precise, and impatient. The line that matters most is the one about waiving compounding fines upon timely compliance. It reads as mercy. It is leverage in another suit. If I find the variance stamp first, that line becomes a concession the board didn't intend to make. The small disputes become less small. A neighbor drags his garbage bin to the curb with more noise than plastic should make and parks it an inch from where the fence meets the sidewalk. Another sets her sprinkler heads to spray a hard arc toward the panel near the dip. Water beads along the top, like impatient drumroll taps. The message is theatrical. The fence is the neighborhood stage, and the crowd wants a scene. I refuse to give them one. I take photos, record times, and write with a calm hand. Petty is loud, proof is quiet. On the scheduled morning, I arrive at the office to inspect records. The property manager unlocks a closet where binders live like geologic layers. Rules, minutes, architectural approvals, variances. I ask for the ones covering March through May. She sets them on a table, and we go through the ritual, sign-in sheet, start time, the reminder that copying costs per page. I nod and open the variances binder to the April section. The first pages are routine. Paint colors granted for stucco houses along the main road, a satellite dish angle exception for a corner townhome, a landscaping variance for drought-tolerant ground cover. Then I hit a page labeled Cedar Cul-de-Sac, slope/height implementation aid. The language is dry and careful. It references an inspection walk on April 11th and a motion to allow modest top rail adjustments to maintain a level appearance where the finished grade falls more than 2 inches over 6 feet. It notes the need to maintain maximum 6 feet from finished grade on the yard side, not the sidewalk side, to avoid optical illusions of height inflation. A metal stamp in the lower margin shows variance packet, received April 12th. The names on the initials line match our committee from spring. The page is not individualized by lot. It covers the entire circle as a unit because the grading was inconsistent at the end of the cul-de-sac. I breathe out, long and steady. This is the document my corkboard had a blank space for. I copy the variance page, the April agenda item referencing it, and the inspection walk sheet. The inspection sheet lists distance measures from curbs, mailbox location, and tree wells. It also states, plainly, that sightline triangles are not applicable to the circle because there is no cross-traffic from an intersecting street. That sentence is surgical. It cuts right through the chair's favorite specter, safety at corners that do not exist. I add one more page while I'm there, a compliance matrix, fence heights, used as an internal guide during spring repairs. It is a grid with side yard, rear yard, corner lot, and cul-de-sac end columns. The cul-de-sac end column repeats the slope language and references the April 12th packet. Each page gets a small receipt stamp for the copies, and I slide them into my folder like cards I've been holding too tight. Back home, I pin a new evidence prop, variance packet, received April 12th, stamped. The corkboard looks less like a patient and more like a map with a route traced in bright thread. I write a summary memo that connects the dots. CC&Rs section 7.2 defines maximums. The April 12th variance packet implements slope adjustments for our circle. The inspection walk confirms sightline triangles don't apply. The maintenance report references alignment to current code. My measurements show compliance with yard side finished grade. The memo is short, because short is heavier when every line sits on paper that the association stamped. With the memo ready, I plan the escalation phase. Not theirs, mine. The association expects a defensive scramble, quick compliance, and a quiet apology in the form of sawdust at the curb. I intend to reverse the pressure. My first step is simple. I send the memo and the scan pages to the manager and CC the board. I ask, politely and directly, for a written acknowledgement that the April 12th document governs height implementation on our circle. I attach my measurements. I add the maintenance report and the board agenda excerpt from March 28th where the chair was tasked to draft a process. I highlight the absence of an adopted process before enforcement began. It is not an accusation. It's a hole. I know how committees respond to holes. They fill them with more urgency. Chapter 18:00. Noise arrives in the form of a compliance patrol passed through that afternoon. 2 volunteers in matching vests drive the circle slow and steady, pausing near the dip and noting something on a clipboard. I can feel the pattern, patrol, paper, pressure. The next day, a violation photo set number 3 appears in my inbox. It contains images of my fence from the sidewalk, shot low to exaggerate height. The email notes that the apparent height exceeds the maximum and that the committee will proceed with the fine schedule if I do not adjust. The key word is apparent. The variance packet erased apparent from the equation for our circle. The packet replaced optical drama with yard side finished grade. Evidence has a way of making adjectives irrelevant. I reply once, attaching the stamped April 12th pages and my measurements. I keep it dry. I ask them to place enforcement on hold until the board reviews whether the variance applies. Within hours, I receive a new message. Special meeting, compliance appeal, Cedar Cul-de-Sac, Tuesday, 7 p.m. The chair wants a decision on the record. Good. The record is where my proof sings. The money pressure rises in parallel. A contractor's flyer lands at my door offering emergency fence compliance services with a discount if I book before fines start compounding. Someone is feeding the drama machine, and someone is making a margin off fear. I make a budget column for contingency and leave it blank on purpose. Blank spaces in my notes remind me what I refuse to fill with panic. Hook. The next vote won't only decide my fence. It will decide whether hundreds of dollars in fines begin stacking against my name, or whether the board admits, on record, that its own April stamp protects the height they are trying to punish. The day of the special meeting arrives with a heat that makes the asphalt gleam. The community room's fluorescent lights buzz, and folding chairs scrape tile with little screams of metal feet. I sit with my folder and a timeline. My evidence props are aligned. Board agenda excerpt, March 28th. To show the process that never became policy. Maintenance report, storm damage to anchor safety and code. Variance packet. Received April 12th to govern slope-based height on our circle, compliance matrix. Fence heights to expose the internal guidance they ignored in their photos. Final notice dated May 12th to show their leverage mechanism dangling over me while they skip their own steps. The chair opens with the rule, Section 7.2, as if it were the only page that matters. Then the property manager reads my memo into the record, and the tenor of the room shifts by degrees. I present my measurements without flourish. I explain finished grade on the yard side. I point to the inspection walks line about sight lines. The treasurer asks about the mailbox distance. I reference my notes, 12 feet. The secretary wonders about consistency. I reference the compliance matrix. The chair frowns at the variance packet because it became a character she wasn't prepared to share the stage with. The board goes into a short deliberation while the room listens to the air conditioner click, click, settle. When they return, the chair's voice is even. The association will review the applicability of the April 12th packet and pause enforcement for 72 hours pending confirmation from the Architectural Committee. Their timer meets mine. Chapter 23:00. The pause is not victory, it is a breath. It gives me time to widen the frame. I submit a second inspection request, this time for the compliance ledger, spring. I want to see if others on our circle were warned, waived, or granted quiet allowances. If selective enforcement exists, it leaves patterns, and patterns leave numbers. The ledger shows a scatter of warnings about weeds, paint chips, and basketball hoops, but it also shows 2 entries from April tagged fence, cul-de-sac, height visual. Both are marked no violation, slope adjusted. The addresses are redacted, but the timing and the tag align with the variance packet's language. Consistency cuts 2 ways. If they allowed slope adjustments for others in April, they cannot pretend the concept was invented when my panels went up in May. The association posts a community update the next day reminding residents that fence heights must comply and that variance requests must be submitted prior to work. It reads like a face-saving press release. It mentions a pending review of cul-de-sac implementation notes. That phrase means my memo landed. It also means the chair understands that the room no longer moves on her urgency alone. Recap at 24:00. At this point, the facts are simple. The board cited a forgotten bylaw and pressed a 72-hour deadline, but their own April 12th variance packet allows slope-based adjustments on our circle and anchors measurements to yard-side finished grade. My measurements, the inspection walk, and the compliance matrix align against a photo set designed to dramatize height from the sidewalk. Enforcement is paused, and the review clock is finally theirs, not mine. The money threat remains. The chair hints at administrative costs if they decide the variance doesn't apply. The newsletter's tone nudges neighbors to believe I'm gaming the system. The social pressure is a current you can't see until you feel it tug your ankles. I don't fight that current with noise. I fight it with a larger plan. Chapter 28:00. Retaliation, in a neighborhood like ours, is a misread word. I'm not tearing anything down or sneaking anything up. I'm building a case the way I built the fence. Level, measured, and anchored to something deeper than surface. The first plank is a broader records request, legacy exceptions, list by lot, from April's action item. If a list exists, it establishes who benefited from slope accommodations, even before the variance packet was stamped. The second plank is a visual. I create a simple diagram of our circle's grade changes using my panel measurements and the inspection walk notes. It shows the dip where mine sits and the identical dip 2 houses over. If my top rail looks high at the dip, so does theirs when viewed from the low side. I intend to demonstrate consistency, not accuse a neighbor. I want pattern, not spectacle. The third plank is a quiet ask to the city's records portal for old right-of-way drawings at our cul-de-sac's end. I'm not hunting a permit I don't need. I want the official note that the circle lacks intersecting street site triangles. If I can match that to the association's inspection sheet, the argument shifts from board preference to civic geometry, which is a polite way of saying there's nothing to see around a corner that doesn't exist. While these planks set, the board's pressure evolves. The chair posts a laminated notice on the community board about consistency and protecting property values. It's written in the voice of a guardian, but it carries the subtext of a guard. A line about escalating fines for noncompliance dwells on the number of days rather than the number of ways to solve a problem. The association mistakes toughness for leadership. Toughness without fairness is theater. I anchor my plan with a final evidence prop for this act. Email, manager to chair, April 13th, 10:40 a.m. Variance packet routing. It surfaces during my second visit to the office. The email notes that the variance packet will apply to Cedar End lots as an implementation aid during storm repair season. The phrase apply to Cedar End lots is not ambiguous, and the timestamp falls a day after the packet stamp. Together, they rip away the chair's last refuge, the claim that implementation was never finalized. With that, I prepare the next move, a written request for clarification of enforcement basis. It asks the board to identify the exact basis for enforcement in light of the April documents, the inspection walk, and the compliance matrix. It also asks the board to confirm that any administrative cost threats will be withdrawn if the variance packet controls. I don't send it yet. I want it to land just after the quiet thing I have planned. The quiet thing isn't sabotage, it's a mirror. For the next association walkthrough, I place a simple copy of the April 12th stamp under a clear sheet in my window facing the circle, visible at a glance. It isn't a taunt. It's a reminder that the board's own paper is watching them. When the patrol passes, their clipboard hesitates. In the rhythm of enforcement, hesitation is the first offbeat. I can feel the energy of the cul-de-sac tilting. The neighbors who once eyed the top rail now glance at the community board, and then at their own hedges, their own paint chips, their own risk. One of them moves a trash can closer to his garage, an inch here, an inch there, as if he's lifting his silhouette out of the patrol's line of sight. Social pressure flows until it meets a firm edge. Then it reflects. I'm not naive. The association can still decide to ignore its own April packet and push a vote that costs me time and money. But if they do, the record I've built becomes a path for appeal, and the social story shifts from non-compliant homeowner to committee ignoring its own stamp. That story doesn't sell well in newsletters. It sells even worse when neighbors realize a precedent against me can be a precedent against them during the next storm. Near the end of this chapter, I return to my theme, boundaries. The board treats them as walls. I treat them as lines you maintain with care, not a cudgel you swing at will. The fence stands exactly where it should. The next act will show whether the board can say the same about its authority. Hook. The next move won't be wood or words. It will be a quiet reveal that tilts the room. Because if the board insists on ignoring its April stamp, I'm prepared to make the contradiction visible to everyone who reads the minutes and everyone who walks past the corkboard in the community room. Retaliation begins with something small enough to look polite. I deliver a packet to the manager's office that mirrors the binder I studied. A clean timeline, copies of the April 12th variance packet, the inspection walk sheet, and the compliance matrix. On the cover page, I list the 3 implementation facts in a numbered outline so no one can pretend to miss them. Beneath that, I include the measurements panel by panel and a sketch of the cul-de-sac grade, showing how the 2-inch dip creates an optical rise from the sidewalk, but not from the yard. I leave one final page. A request that any further enforcement notices about my fence include a citation to the exact sentence in the governing document or the April packet used as the basis. It looks like courtesy. It functions like a tripwire. 20 minutes later, I post a shorter version of the same outline on the community court board, right beside the laminated reminder about consistency and property values. I keep it neutral, no names, no rhetoric. It simply states that the cul-de-sac slope implementation was stamped on April 12th and that measurements must be taken from the yard side finished grade. Neighbors stop and read. Some tilt their heads toward the circle as if the asphalt itself might confirm the date. Petty pressure bleeds off when people realize the rules can say different things than a photo angle suggests. I add one more layer, a calm, public request in the next open session for the committee to adopt a one-page fence measurement procedure for slope lots, using the April packet's language. The ask isn't flashy. It forces the board to either affirm what already exists or explain why a stamped packet should be ignored. Either path creates record, and record is where I'm strongest. My plan isn't about winning a moment. It's about making every step point back to a sentence they signed. Hook. The next decision the board makes won't just cost or save me money. It will sit in the minutes as the model for every fence on our circle. If they pick optics over the April stamp, legal consequence follows them, not me. The social weather shifts in small ways. The loud trash can returns to its usual corner. The sprinkler arc stops wrapping my top rail. On evening walks, I catch neighbors glancing at the corkboard before they wave. The glance comes first, then the wave, as if they need to calibrate what story we're living in now. Stories matter here. The board's urgency no longer defines ours. The committee schedules its clarification meeting for a Thursday night. The room hums with fluorescent light and the faint rattle of an old vent. I carry the same folder but add one more prop, a one-page implementation procedure drafted in the board's own cadence. It paraphrases the variance packet, defines finished grade from the yard side, and includes a small diagram of the cul-de-sac end. I hand copies to the manager at the sign-in table so no one can claim they never saw a workable form. If the committee wants order, I'm offering it. The chair opens with familiar phrases about preserving standards and preventing slippery slopes. Then the manager reads the April packet's header and the inspection walks line about site, triangles not applying to our circle. The treasurer asks about consistency over time, which is where the compliance ledger, spring, becomes a quiet spotlight. Those two April entries marked no violation, slope-adjusted hover in every pause. The secretary suggests a short-term moratorium on escalations pending measurement training. I don't smile. I take notes. Moratoriums are admissions in soft shoes. The chair counters by projecting the patrol photos, the low angles from the sidewalk that make the top rail look tall. The room leans forward. I don't object. I simply slide my measurements to the edge of the table, add the inspection walk sheet, and point to the phrase yard-side finished grade. The packet stamp sits like a second gavel. When the debate starts to loop, the manager clears her throat and reads a short email she found in the archive, the one routed on April 13th at 10:40 a.m. It states that the variance packet will apply to Cedar End lots as an implementation aid during storm repair season. The chair pauses for the smallest fraction of a second. That pause is the seam. The committee retreats for deliberation. In the hallway, the air is cooler and smells faintly of toner and rain soaked into old carpet. A neighbor mentions remembering the first year's taller runs while landscaping settled. Another notes the April date with a finger against her phone screen, as if the month itself decided to show up and testify. I keep quiet. This isn't the moment to narrate victory. It's the moment to let their own pages speak. They return with emotion, adopt the fence measurement procedure for cul-de-sac slope lots, using the April 12th variance packet as the controlling implementation guide, pause all enforcement about my panels, and schedule a training for patrol volunteers on how to measure from the yard side. The vote is not dramatic. It's steady and public. The chair adds a sour addendum about ensuring uniform aesthetic outcomes, but the core is decided. The packet that lived in a binder now lives as procedure. Climax comes not with a cheer, but with a simple piece of paper sliding across the table. Enforcement withdrawal, Cedar Cul-de-Sac, fence height. The subject line cites the April 12th packet and the newly adopted procedure. It withdraws the May 12th notice and voids any administrative cost threat attached to it. It acknowledges that my measurements are compliant when taken from the yard side finished grade at the dip. It reaffirms the sightline note from the inspection walk. The manager asks me to initial receipt. I do with a pen that doesn't shake. There is a short, necessary pause in me, not the room. It's the pause that follows weeks of being told urgency is the only path to order. The paper says otherwise. The room's low hum fills in the space between one breath and the next. The chair thanks the volunteers for their diligence and promises a better process. The promise is less important than the stamp at the bottom of my copy. I don't gloat. I do one small thing that matters. I ask the board to add a single sentence to the minutes. It's the sentence that states the April 12th variance packet governs slope measurement for the cul-de-sac end, and that future notices must cite the procedure adopted tonight. The secretary nods. The chair hesitates, then agrees. The sentence goes in. That line becomes the fence I keep, measured in words, not inches. Hook, before the night ends, there is one final turn. The board must decide whether to notify the entire community about the new measurement procedure. If they bury it, I'm prepared to show neighbors exactly how to request records and ask for uniform enforcement, which opens a door to legal consequence the association has worked hard to keep closed. The update arrives the next morning as a community bulletin. It is shorter than I would have written and too proud of its own clarity, but the essence is there. Slope measurement from yard side finished grade at cul-de-sac ends. Sightline triangles are not applicable for the circle, training for patrols, and a link to the procedure. The board declares victory for consistent standards, which is fine. The record shows what it shows. Aftermath is quieter than I expected. The fence doesn't change. The whispers do. On evening walks, neighbors talk more about paint colors than about my panels. A new topic grabs the corkboard. A call for volunteers to plant drought-hardy shrubs around the mailboxes. The circle returns to its rituals, but the story under the rituals is different. The association learned that speed without process doesn't feel like leadership. It feels like panic wearing a badge. I learned that patience, layered with proof, turns pressure into leverage you don't have to swing. I tally the costs I didn't pay. No compounding fines, no emergency contractor fees, no wasted lumber. I also note the effort that did cost me. Hours in binders, 2 record inspections, a memo drafted like a blueprint. Boundary work always costs something. This time, the result is worth every page. The final notice dated May 12th still sits on my corkboard, but now it's a trophy of sorts. Evidence that urgency blinked when asked to read. There's a sliver of satisfaction I don't mind admitting. It isn't about winning against a person. It's about a process that now fits the shape of the street we actually live on. The cul-de-sac breathes easier when rules reflect land and not optics. The top rail casts the same narrow shadow it always did at sunset, but the air around it feels lighter. If anyone on our circle faces the same glare next season, the procedure is there, stamped and linked. A satisfying revenge story doesn't need fireworks. Sometimes it's a sentence in the minutes and a quiet fence that never moved. Tell me your fence rule showdown in one line. No names, just stakes. Next video tease, 48:00, 50:00. Next time, the drama moves from lumber to lights. Imagine a neighborhood where a charity display needs evening foot traffic to hit a medical fundraiser goal, but the committee enforces a curfew that dims every strand at 9 sharp. Sponsors tense up, neighbors whisper, and a timer starts on goodwill the way one started on my fence. The chair frames it as noise control. The residents frame it as a choice between empathy and optics. In the middle sits a permit stamped by the city with a time window that doesn't match the curfew, and a trail of emails that reveal who knew what and when. The question won't be whether the lights glow. It will be whose clock decides when community counts.